Alexei used to believe that love, once real, could never fade. For years, he carried that belief like a promise written in stone. His marriage to Natalia had begun in warmth, the kind of warmth that fills tiny rooms and makes even the simplest meals feel like a feast. Their first apartment in Moscow was small, but alive with laughter. He remembered how she used to hum while making tea, the way she'd dance barefoot on the wooden floor whenever her favorite song came on. But lately, everything had gone quiet. The air between them had turned heavy, as if something invisible hung over their home. Natalia had become distant. She smiled less, talked less, and her once bright eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. She began coming home late, sometimes with excuses that didn't make sense. Traffic, meetings, a colleague's birthday. And always, that faint perfume trailed behind her, floral and unfamiliar, as if borrowed from a world that no longer included him. Alexei tried not to think the worst. He told himself she was just tired, overworked, maybe even depressed. He asked once softly, "Is everything all right, Natashka?" She just nodded, forcing a smile, her lips trembling as if holding something back. But silence has a way of turning into doubt. Nights grew colder. They still shared the same bed, but there was a space between them that felt wider than oceans. Alexei would stare at the ceiling, listening to her slow breathing, wondering if she was asleep or pretending to be. The love that once came so naturally now felt like something he had to fight for, yet he didn't know how. Then one evening, while sitting at a cafe with his old friend Oleg, the words that would change everything were spoken. They were laughing about old times when Oleg leaned closer, his tone suddenly serious. "Lesha," he said quietly, using Alexei's nickname, "if I were you, I'd look into your wife's purse before the divorce." Alexei blinked, stunned. "What divorce? What are you talking about?" Oleg shrugged, his eyes heavy with pity. "I'm just saying, brother. You've been looking like a man with questions he's afraid to ask." The comment hit deeper than Oleg could have imagined. Alexei forced a laugh, waving it off, but his chest felt tight all the way home. His mind kept replaying those words. Before the divorce. Was that what people saw when they looked at him now? A man whose marriage was already ending. That night, Natalia came home later than usual. She looked tired but calm, as if nothing had changed. She kissed his cheek and went straight to bed. Her handbag, a beige leather one he'd given her for her birthday last year, sat on the chair beside the dresser. He glanced at it once, then again. His heart began to pound. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, watching her sleep. The pale glow from the streetlight touched her face, and for a moment she looked so fragile that guilt washed over him. "What am I doing?" he thought. But then another voice inside him whispered, "You deserve to know." His fingers trembled as he reached for the bag. Slowly he unzipped it, careful not to wake her. Inside was the usual mess of a woman's world. Lipstick, keys, compact mirror, receipts, a half-eaten chocolate bar. But then, tucked neatly at the bottom, was a white envelope with his name written on it in her handwriting. His pulse quickened. Why would she hide something like that? He hesitated before opening it. Inside were several sheets of paper, medical reports stamped with the hospital logo. At first, the words blurred together, his eyes refusing to believe what they saw. Then a small folded note slipped out. In her familiar handwriting it read, "I couldn't tell you, Alexei. I didn't want to break you." He froze. His throat went dry. The room seemed to shrink around him. The test results said oncology department and listed words he didn't understand, except for one that screamed at him in bold letters, diagnosis. Alexei's knees weakened. He sank into the chair, staring at the papers, trying to make sense of it all. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't infidelity. It was something far more terrifying. He sat there for a long time, staring at Natalia as she slept, peaceful, unaware that her secret had been discovered. His chest ached, not from anger but from helplessness. She had carried this alone, hiding her pain to protect him. He wanted to wake her, to tell her he knew, to hold her and promise that nothing could ever break them. But he couldn't move. He just sat there, listening to the ticking of the clock, the sound echoing like distant footsteps in an empty house. The next morning, he barely spoke. Natalia noticed, of course. "You're quiet today," she said, pouring him coffee. He forced a smile. "Just tired." She nodded, pretending to believe him, though her eyes seemed to linger on him longer than usual, as if she knew something had shifted between them. As she left for work, Alexei watched her walk down the street from their window, her scarf fluttering in the cold breeze. He wanted to call her back, to tell her he loved her, but the words stuck in his throat. That night, he sat alone again, the envelope still on the table in front of him. The words Oleg had said came back like a haunting echo. "If I were you, I'd look into your wife's purse before the divorce," he whispered to himself. Voice breaking, "You were right, Oleg, but I wish you hadn't been." And as the city lights flickered outside, Alexei realized that some truths don't destroy, they simply break your heart open, forcing you to see what love really means. Alexei woke up the next morning with a weight in his chest that felt like stone. The envelope still lay on the kitchen table, a silent witness to everything he'd learned. The words on those papers had burned themselves into his mind. Oncology department, stage 2, treatment plan. He couldn't bear it. He needed to know the truth from someone else, someone who could tell him exactly what those words meant. He skipped breakfast, barely able to swallow water. His hands trembled as he grabbed his coat and keys. The morning air outside was biting cold, but he barely noticed. The address from the paper led him to a grey hospital building on the edge of Moscow, the kind of place that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Inside, the nurse behind the reception desk looked up politely. "How can I help you?" "My wife," Alexei said, his voice thin and hoarse. "Natalia Alexeyeva. She's been here for treatment." The nurse frowned slightly, checking her computer. "Yes," she said softly. "She's one of our patients." He swallowed hard. "What's wrong with her?" The nurse hesitated. Her eyes softened, but she looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir. We're not supposed to share medical details without the patient's consent." He leaned closer, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm her husband." "I didn't know. I found her test results. I need to understand." The woman sighed, her expression changing. After a long pause, she spoke quietly. "She's been coming for treatment for 3 months. It's cancer, advanced enough that she needed therapy right away. She told us she didn't want you to worry. Said you had too much on your plate already." Alexei's knees almost gave out. He grabbed the edge of the counter to steady himself. His mind went blank. "She said that?" he whispered. The nurse nodded gently. "She didn't want to burden you. But she's very brave, your wife. Always smiling even when she was clearly in pain." He stood there frozen. For a long time he couldn't even breathe. Every memory, every argument, every silence came flooding back. But they looked different now. All those times she had turned away, gone quiet, come home late. It wasn't guilt. It was suffering. When he finally left the hospital, the sky was grey and heavy. Snow had started to fall, slow and silent, melting as it touched the ground. He walked to his car without feeling his feet, his thoughts spinning like a storm. He sat there for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel, his eyes burning but no tears falling. He remembered how he'd accused her of hiding something, how he'd snapped at her for no reason, how she'd looked at him with those hurt, tired eyes and said nothing. He pressed his hands against his face, whispering, "Oh God, Natalia, why didn't you tell me?" When he finally returned home that evening, he didn't turn on the lights. Natalia was in bed, reading a book, pretending not to notice the tension in his shoulders. He sat down beside her quietly. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he reached for her hand. "You should have told me," he said softly. Natalia froze. Her eyes lifted to his, fear flickering across her face. "Told you? What?" "I know," he said simply. His voice trembled, but there was no anger in it, only pain. "The treatments. The hospital." Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "I wanted you to hate me, not pity me." He took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I could never hate you, Natalia. Not for this. Not for anything." She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "I didn't want to see that look in your eyes, that helplessness. I wanted to protect you from it." He shook his head slowly. "You don't protect the people you love by hiding from them." For the first time in months, she broke down in his arms, sobbing quietly. And Alexei held her, his heart shattering with every breath she took. That night they didn't speak much. They just held each other. The silence between them no longer cold, but full of everything they'd left unsaid. The months that followed blurred into one long season of hospital corridors, whispered prayers, and moments that felt both endless and fleeting. Alexei learned how to live differently, quietly, gently, as if every second mattered. He became the kind of man who brought fresh flowers every few days, who cooked Natalia's favorite soup even when she barely ate, who smiled when his heart wanted to collapse. Natalia, fragile but radiant, would often tease him softly. "You'll wear yourself out fussing over me?" she'd whisper, her voice thin but warm. He would just smile. "Then I'll wear myself out with love." There were good days, mornings when she'd wake up with color in her cheeks and talk about places they'd visit once she got better. And there were bad days, days when pain made her quiet, when she stared out the window for hours as if trying to memorize the world before it slipped away. Through it all, Alexei stayed. He learned the rhythm of her medications, the exact way to hold her when the pain came, and how to make her laugh even when tears rested in her eyes. Sometimes he'd read her poetry, old verses they both loved. One evening, as he read softly, she interrupted him and said, "You know, I used to think I ruined your life." He looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, tracing his hand with her fragile fingers. "You deserved someone healthy, someone who could give you a family, a future, not endless hospital bills." He shook his head, eyes glistening. "You gave me everything I ever wanted, Natalia. You gave me yourself. That's all I ever needed." Her eyes softened, tears catching the light. "You're too good, Alexei." He laughed quietly. "No, just lucky." But luck, he knew, was running thin. By spring, her strength began to fade. She grew lighter, her voice softer, her laughter rarer. Yet she never complained. Every morning, she still greeted him with a small smile, as if reminding him that love was stronger than pain. On one of those final afternoons, the sun poured through the window, bathing the room in golden light. Natalia rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "Promise me something." "Anything," he said. "When I'm gone, don't close yourself off. Don't stop living. Love again. Let someone make you smile the way I used to." His throat tightened. "Don't talk like that," she smiled weakly. "I'm serious. Promise me." He hesitated, then nodded. "I promise I'll live. But I'll always carry you with me." Her eyes closed gently, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "That's all I ever wanted." Natalia passed away a few weeks later, when the lilacs bloomed outside their window, her favorite flowers. The scent filled their small apartment, wrapping Alexei in bittersweet memory. The world seemed quieter after that. The kettle still whistled in the mornings, the clock still ticked, but everything sounded hollow without her laughter. He kept her favorite mug on the shelf and her book of poems by the bed. Some nights he'd wake up reaching for her hand, only to find emptiness. But he didn't run from it anymore. He let the grief stay, because grief, he realized, was just love that had nowhere to go. Years passed, but he never forgot. Every spring, when the lilacs bloomed, Alexei would walk to the small cemetery near their old apartment. He'd bring a bouquet, kneel by her grave, and whisper softly, "If I were you, I'd tell him the truth sooner." He'd sit there a while, listening to the wind move through the trees, feeling the same quiet peace he used to feel when she was near, because in the end, Alexei learned that love isn't about protecting someone from pain. It's about walking through it together, hand in hand, even when one of those hands eventually lets go. What we hide out of love often hurts more than the truth. Real love isn't about keeping someone safe from pain. It's about facing it together, honestly, no matter how much it hurts. Subscribe for more soulful stories and hit the bell. Share your own story below. Someone out there might find strength in your words.